The document that tells you exactly why you didn't pass arrives about 10 business days later, and most people read the first line and never open it again. That report rates you across all 3 domains, and it's the most honest study plan anybody will ever hand you. And there's one thing that successful retakers change, which has almost nothing to do with studying harder.
Hey everyone, Erica here. And a word about the tone of this one before we start. Not passing a criteria-based exam on a first attempt is common, and it's not a verdict on whether you're good at this job.
PMI says so themselves, in fact. The report explicitly states the categories exist to help you see where you need more preparation and should not be used for other purposes, such as job placement decisions.
This is Michael, which is a remarkable sentence to find in an official document, and worth holding on to if a first attempt didn't go your way.
And the practical value is enormous, because the handbook is clear that the diagnostic gives specific guidance for both passing and failing candidates. It's not a punishment, it's a map.
The report applies the same 4 rating categories to each domain, which means you get told separately how you did on people, on process, and on business environment.
And that separation is the whole gift. A total score would tell you to study more. A per-domain rating tells you what to study, which is a completely different instruction.
And yet the commonest thing retakers describe is opening the report, seeing the word fail, feeling the floor go, and closing the tab. Which is completely understandable and also the most expensive thing you can do that afternoon.
And there's a timing detail worth knowing before you go looking for it because it catches people out. The result you see on screen at the end of the session is preliminary until PMI confirms it.
The official report reaches the online system within 10 business days, and that's the one carrying the per-domain ratings. So the afternoon you walk out, you know the verdict and not the diagnosis.
Which is a hard 10 days, and it's also why so many people never go back. By the time the useful document arrives, the wound has closed over it. Michael has been pushing on the version of this that actually matters, so he should ask it.
And it's the question underneath the whole episode. What's the difference between slightly below and far below?
So that's where we start. A report that names your weakest domain, written by an organization that says plainly it's meant to help rather than to judge. One thing before the next part, and then we move right on. If any of this is clicking, tap that like, hit subscribe, and ring the bell for the next one. It takes a second, it costs nothing, and it helps more than you would think. So the 2 categories that matter after a first attempt, and the difference between them isn't cosmetic.
They imply different amounts of work, and PMI's own wording says so.
Professor Nakamura is at the desk for this.
Nearly, and I'd put the precision on the adverb. Below target says performance was slightly below and additional preparation is recommended. Needs improvement says far below and strongly recommended. The published wording escalates deliberately.
So Professor Nakamura, below target in one domain and target in the other 2 is a narrow miss.
And it usually means the knowledge is present and something else went wrong. Timing, misreading, second-guessing, or one topic inside that domain that was never covered properly. That's a repair job, not a rebuild.
And needs improvement is a different conversation, and it deserves an honest one rather than a reassuring one.
It means the material in that domain has not been learned to the standard the exam expects. More practice questions won't fix that, because practice questions test recall and what's missing is the underlying model.
Which is genuinely useful to be told, because the instinct after failing is always more questions. Another 1,000 items.
And on a needs improvement domain, those 1,000 items will mostly teach you that you don't know it, one item at a time, which you already knew.
So the response differs by category. Below target, drill and diagnose. Needs improvement, go back to the material and learn the domain properly before you drill it at all.
And there's a case people find hardest to accept, which is needs improvement on process. That's 41% of the paper. A foundation problem there can't be patched in 2 weeks, and pretending otherwise wastes an attempt.
Whereas needs improvement in business environment at 26% is still serious and it's a smaller hole. And there's a combination worth naming because it's commoner than either extreme. Below target in 2 domains at once.
which is usually not two content gaps. Two narrow misses in different domains far more often indicate something general, and the candidates who read it as two separate study problems tend to repeat the result.
Because whatever was general is still general the second time. Timing, or reading, or the instinct problem, none of which is confined to one domain.
Professor Nakamura, thank you. Repair job rather than rebuild is the distinction I'd want somebody to have before they book a retake.
Read the adverb. It's doing all the work.
So 4 patterns, and they come up again and again in what retakers describe. Only the first one is fixed by studying more, which is why the default response so often fails.
The first is the honest one, a genuine content gap, a domain, or a cluster of tasks inside it that never got proper attention.
And that's the pattern the report identifies best, because a content gap shows up as one domain clearly behind the others.
Lewis, the second, is the one this series has warned about from the first episode. Experience overriding the outline. You answer what you would actually do, and the exam wanted what the task describes.
Which is why capable practitioners with 15 years behind them fail this exam, and graduates sometimes don't. The knowledge isn't the problem, the instinct is competing with it.
And this one is invisible on the report, which is the difficulty. It shows up as being slightly below across 2 or 3 domains rather than badly behind in one.
The third is practice that never matched the format. If every rep you did was a lettered multiple choice and the paper handed you case blocks, matching items, and pick twos, you prepared for a different exam.
And that also tends to spread rather than concentrate because it's not about any domain. It's about the surface.
So how do you tell stamina from a knowledge gap? The fourth pattern is stamina. 240 minutes is a long time to reason carefully, and a lot of people describe the last 40 questions as a blur.
Which shows up as a pattern nobody looks for, because the report can't see it at all. It's not a domain weakness, it's a fatigue curve, and it lands on whichever domain happened to be last.
And there's a way to work out which of the invisible 3 which nobody enjoys because it involves being honest with yourself for 20 minutes.
Sit down the same week and write out every question you can still remember getting wrong, and beside each one write why, not the topic, the reason.
10 or 12 items is enough. If most of them say I picked the decisive option, that's the instinct problem. If most say I ran out of time, that's stamina. If most say I had never seen a question laid out like that, that's format.
And do it within a few days because that recall fades fast, and it's the only diagnostic that reaches the 3 things the report can't see.
And before we get to what retakers change, notice something about that list. The report reliably identifies one of the 4.
Which is exactly why the report is necessary and not sufficient. It tells you whether you've a content problem. It can't tell you which of the other 3 you've.
At the top I said successful retakers change one thing that has almost nothing to do with studying harder. Here it's. They change how they answer, not how much they know.
Which sounds like a slogan until you look at what it means in practice.
Professor Nakamura, back to the desk.
And it's measurable rather than motivational. The consistent report from candidates who pass a second attempt is that they stopped answering as the person in charge and started answering as the person the outline describes. Those are different characters.
The person in charge decides, escalates, commits, and moves. The person the outline describes consults, diagnoses, engages, and routes.
And the second character isn't weaker. It's simply operating in a world where the process exists and is assumed to work. That assumption is what makes the exam answerable.
Michael, the second change is format. They stop doing only lettered questions and start doing case blocks, matching sets, and multiple response items because those were the surfaces that cost them.
And they sit at least one full-length paper before the retake, which almost nobody does the first time round because it's a genuinely unpleasant afternoon.
4 hours in one sitting, no lookups, no pausing. It's the only way to find out whether your last 40 questions are worse than your first 40.
And the fourth change is the least popular. They wait longer than they wanted to. A retake booked 10 days after a failure usually reproduces the failure because none of the 3 changes above can happen in 10 days.
Which collides with how it feels, because after not passing you want it fixed immediately and the wait is unbearable.
And that impulse is the single most expensive one available because attempts are finite. 3 inside the eligibility year, and then a full year of waiting before you may reapply.
So burning attempt 2 11 days after attempt 1 isn't determination. It's spending a third of your attempts to find out nothing changed.
And there's one more change worth naming, because it sounds small and isn't. They stop studying alone.
Explaining a scenario out loud to another person exposes the gap between recognizing an answer and being able to produce one. That gap is where second attempts are usually lost, and it's almost impossible to detect on your own.
And it doesn't need a study group. One other person who will ask why twice is enough.
Professor Nakamura, thank you. Answering as the person the outline describes rather than the person in charge is the sharpest thing said in this whole block.
Change the character, then book the date.
So the arithmetic of attempts, because it changes how you should treat the second one.
3 attempts inside your 1-year eligibility period. After 3, you wait a full year from the date of the last exam before you may reapply.
Lewis, PMI, says plainly why. The policy exists to uphold exam security and reduce overexposure of exam content. It's not there to punish anybody.
But the consequence for you is the same either way. 3 isn't many, and the gap between attempt 3 and a 4th is a year of your life.
So attempt 2 should be your best attempt, not your fastest. Which is the opposite of what the feeling after a failure pushes you toward.
Erica, picture Grace Oyalaran, a delivery manager with 12 years on public sector programs, whose first report read target on process, below target on people, and needs improvement on business environment.
And the useful thing about that report is how specific it's. 2 different problems needing 2 different responses in one document.
She went back to the business environment material properly rather than drilling it, spent a fortnight on the people reflex, and left process almost alone because it was already at target.
And she booked the retake 11 weeks later rather than 11 days, which is the part most people find hardest to copy.
One honest caveat, and it matters. Waiting isn't automatically right. If your report says below target in one domain and target in the other 2, and you know exactly what went wrong, a shorter gap can be perfectly sensible.
So who should wait and who should not? A narrow miss with a known cause can move quickly. A needs improvement in a heavily weighted domain can't, whatever the calendar in your head is saying.
And nobody outside your own report can tell you which of those which is the whole reason to open it.
If one thing survives today, make it this. Not passing tells you almost nothing, and the report that follows tells you almost everything, so the only real mistake isn't reading it.
Open the report, it is on your side.
If you're sitting with a report you haven't been able to face, subscribing keeps the rest of this course where you can find it when you're ready, and it costs you nothing. So tell me before you go, if you've sat this exam, did you read your domain ratings or just the verdict? Go and open it. This is Lewis, and I will see you in the next one.